بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا بفيض فضلك رشدنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم أت نفوسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها يا رب العالمين. We'll be starting our lesson in a moment by looking at the rulings of corrupt sales, but there's a good question that was posed, which is that if we want to look up a particular about a particular book, how do we look for it? So there's a number of useful books related to this. One of the most useful is the work of Dr. Lu'ay al-Khalili, a capable Palestinian Jordanian researcher and trained Hanafi scholar. He has a work called La'ali al-Mahar, which La'ali al-Mahar, in which he looks at the sources of Hashiyat ibn Abdin, and that's quite comprehensive. So that's very useful, and he gives some background about the book and the author. That's one of the useful works that should be in the library of a talib ilm. And the PDF's available online, and it's of significant benefit, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد قائد الغر المحجلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا بفيض فضلك رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Multaqa al-Abhur, we're continuing to look at corrupt sales, the bay' al-fasid, and there's a subsection on the rulings of corrupt sales. And this can be summarized as following: that the invalid sale, the bay' al-batil, it's as if it did not take place. So ownership is not transferred. So the item of sale, the mabi'a, continues to belong to the seller, the ba'i', and the price rightfully belongs to the buyer, the mushtari. So there's no transfer of ownership. The corrupt sale, the bay' al-fasid, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Right? The corrupt sale is sinful. It must be annulled or corrected, as we saw. And its ruling is as follows: that before taking possession, right, ownership is not transferred. Right? Before the two parties take possession of the item of sale, right? So before the buyer takes possession of the item of sale in a corrupt transaction, right, whether due to non-definition of price, insufficient definition of the item of sale, or due to corrupting conditions. We saw that these are the three principal reasons of a corrupt transaction. What happens? Before taking possession, and before rectifying it, ownership is not transferred. So the item still belongs to the seller, the ba'i'. Then after taking possession, so when the purchaser takes possession of the item of sale, what happens? Ownership is transferred. However, it is transferred as what's called milkan khabithan. It is transferred, but it is milk khabith. It's considered vile. It's morally despicable to take ownership in such a manner. So what is their duty, therefore? What is their duty, Sadati? Yeah. Either to cancel the transaction, or there's another option, which is to correct it. Which is to correct it. And that is, so for example, if I sold the Masir these lightweights, so I sold them to him. I sell you these two weights, and we describe them properly, etc., without setting the price. He takes ownership of it. What happens? So when possession is given to him, like he comes, picks them up, but what have we not yet done? We've not set a price. So what do we have to do to rectify it? It's to set the price. So if we agree on a price after, it rectifies the contract going forward. But we both still need to make tawbah, because there's a moral dimension to our transactions. So the tawbah, so is istighfar sufficient? Because istighfar is like saying sorry. But if you say sorry, is it enough? No, you have to commit not to do it again. So every time there is, every time the baker makes apple pie for me, Ibrahim's family comes and they take the pie. They say, I'm sorry, but they keep doing it. That apology is not enough. So the istighfar is an apology. Istighfar is sufficient to lift the sin if accompanied by tawbah. And tawbah is an action of the heart. Istighfar is a dua, talabul maghfirah. But the optimal way of saying astaghfirullah is to intend complete tawbah every time. Even if one has one's daily wird, astaghfirullah, 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 one should intend complete tawbah. Right? Dimnan. Right? Within one's istighfar. Anyway, that's a spiritual point, but there's a spiritual dimension to these transactions. That the ownership is transferred, but we put it in red here. Why? Because it is a milkan khabithan. It is vile. Tamaman. So let's look at what Imam Ibrahim al-Halabi has to tell us. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, فصل. قبض المشتري المبيع بيعا باطلا بإذن بائعه لا يملكه. Right? So if the buyer takes possession of the item of sale, the mabi', in an invalid transaction, he does not own it. What would be the example of an invalid transaction? Yeah, selling something that's not mal mutaqawwim. So we said, okay, I sell you this barrel of wine, wali'adhu billah, for $1,000. So selling something that's mal that is not mal mutaqawwim. What would be another example of a bay' batil? Yes, selling your kidney. Okay, that's also not mal mutaqawwim. So okay, we've taken something that's not mal mutaqawwim. What will be other cases of an invalid sale? That's all related to the item of sale. So what is the integral of a sale, Sadati? Yeah, but they define it quite usefully. Right? They say the ruknuhu, that yani it's, yeah, the it the a valid sale entails suduru ruknihi min ahlihi ala mahallihi. Right? There's the rukn, ijab and qabul, min ahlihi, from two parties fit to transact. Ala mahallihi. The mahal is al-mabi'. So we looked at examples of the where the mahal is mal ghayr mutaqawwim, where the subject of the sale is something that is not of recognized value. Okay, but another situation is, what if there's no ijab and qabul? How? So, you know, Islam bakeries made that apple pie that I like. But Brother Abdul Razak came and he entered the bakery. He picked up the apple pie, said, I buy this. And he went out. So he made an ijab. Was there any qabul? No, right? No qabul took place. So that would be an example of the rukn did not take place. There's an ijab, there's no qabul. Okay? Now the qabul could be by indication that young Zubair is on the phone with his wife. They're not living together, so they're on the phone together. Right? So he said, so Uncle Abdul Razak comes, takes the pie, say, I buy it. And from the counter, the guy, you know, indicates that is a non-verbal acceptance. Now, the transaction would be valid if you have a qa'imatul as'ar, if you have a price list, then that would be not even corrupt. Why? Because if you have a store, you should either label things, and that's mentioning the price, or there should be a price list that is visible. Okay. So if we understand that, then we can look at the issue that, so that's where the rukn doesn't take place. There's either ijab and no qabul. And usually that would happen if the seller comes, take something, but the buyer comes, the mushtari comes, take something, but the buyer did not agree. Okay. Or what's the other? Suduru ruknihi min ahlihi. What would be the case where someone would not be ahl for the transaction? Go ahead, Brother Ahmed. No, so that's a completely separate issue, right? That's a completely separate issue. The contemporary transactions, right? When there's a display price, that's what's called a standing offer, right? That's called this. There's different ways they translate it in modern Arabic, but they would call it an ijab qa'im, a standing offer. Right? So there's a price that's displayed. So that's like a standing offer. when you pick it up, at some point, the transaction takes place. Either when you go and check out from the counter, some places, now I don't know if it's implemented in the UK, but in some countries, if you just walk out with the items, as soon as you walk out, it is automatically, that's considered checking out, and you get billed for it. So that's when the transaction is considered complete. So that's a separate issue. That's a separate issue, right? Here, and there, as long as the offer is clear, that the item is on display, the price is listed, that's a standing offer, and when the checkout takes place, you have accepted. So that's a separate issue. I believe, see, Abdul Latif, we did give the the Mufti Taqi Usmani's work, the Mashru' Qanun al-Buyu' as a resource for the course. No, but yeah. So that tackles some of those things, and inshallah we'll do a inshallah we'll sorry, we're supposed to have had a monthly tutorial, but I was under the weather this weekend. My apologies. So anyways, so those are contemporary applications. Here, just if we're looking at the basic sale, we've looked at if the item of sale was not valid, and we took examples, right? What examples did we give, Sadati? Masir cannot sell his kidneys or liver or anything else. What else can't we sell? We mentioned pork, wine, etc. So the item is not of recognized value. The other is if the integral doesn't take place, there's an offer without acceptance, for example. The third case is min ahlihi. The transactor is not ahl. What would be an example of the transactor not being ahl? Very young child. Yeah, very young child. Right? So the child has not reached the age of discernment. In court, it would be considered 7 years. But the ulama said that for minor items, a child's transaction would be considered valid. So there's a fundamental difference between a child going and buying some candy from the local store. They wanted to buy some chocolate. You can assume that they have permission from their parents for that. But if a child has, like a young girl has a bunch of gold that she's wearing, can you buy the gold from a 5-year-old child? No. Even if it belongs to her, because they're not ahl. And who is ahl? Is al-aqil al-mumayyiz. Right? Is the person of sound mind who has reached the age of discernment. We touched upon that in the beginning. So in an invalid transaction like this, قبض المشتري المبيع بيعا باطلا. In an invalid sale, if the buyer takes possession of the item of sale, بإذن بائعه, with the seller's permission, أي ولو بإذن بائعه, even with the seller's permission, لا يملكه, he does not own it. So if he doesn't own it, what's the ruling of that item in his hand? So he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, that وَهُوَ أَمَانَةٌ فِي يَدِهِ. So that item that he's taken possession of is an amana in the hands of في يده أي في يد المشتري عند البعض, according to some ulama. وَمَضْمُونٌ عند البعض, and it is there's liability for it according to others. So some said it's a trust. So what's the consequence of that? So if we say that there's that apple pie, Uncle Abdul Razak came, took the apple pie, offer without acceptance. It's an amana in his hands. What if then Ibrahim was visiting Uncle Razak's family and she ate it? Does he have to compensate for it? When is there liability for an amana? There's a transgression. Or negligence. Ta'addi or taqsir. So an amana, there's no liability for an amana unless there's transgression or negligence. Okay, so Uncle Abdul Razak took that apple pie from the bakery. He took it home. The bakery called and said, Uncle Razak, they call him Uncle Razak, that apple pie wasn't for you. It was for Shaykh Faraz. Said, okay, I'll bring it back. In the meantime, someone without his permission ate it, even though he'd put it in his room, for example. Right? It's a trust, so there's no liability for it. Or on the way back, someone came and robbed him. Someone came to his car and robbed him. So it's a trust. There's no liability for it. Right? Unless there is negligence or transgression. So he says, عند البعض. Some said that it's a trust. And others said it's subject to liability, meaning regardless of how it perishes or is harmed, he has to pay the market value for it. Right? And it's مضمون عند البعض أي بالقيمة. The second position is with the, and what's due would be not the market value, but rather, so not the price, but the market value. Okay. So if we take that, he mentions two opinions here. The ulama had taraddud on this issue. Right? According to the method of the author of the Majalla, what would appear to be the relied upon position? So he mentions two opinions. Which one is assumed to be the chosen opinion according to the method that Ibrahim al-Halabi defined for himself? Sadati? The first one, right? Because if he mentions two opinions, the first one is the one that is chosen, unless he mentions a second to be the one the fatwa is upon, etc. Right? And this is, then he says, وَقِيلَ الْأَوَّلُ قَوْلُ الْإِمَامِ. It is said that the first is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. وَالثَّانِي قَوْلُهُمَا. And the second is the position of the Sahibain. And they took it أخذا من الاختلاف فيما لو بيع مدبر أو ولد فمات في يد مشتريه حيث لا يضمن عنده خلافا لهما. And they derived it from this opinion about what happens to the mudabbar if it perishes in the hands of the buyer, etc. So here, um, there's long-standing difference of opinion about this. And sometimes when it's mentioned that such and such is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, sometimes it's explicitly the position, i.e. that Imam Muhammad al-Hasan in his books narrates from Imam Abu Hanifa. But sometimes it is understood to be the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, and there's levels of understanding. Sometimes it could be, it's understood from a clear principle of Abu Hanifa. Sometimes it's understood from a similar ruling, but that ruling could be based on this or it could be based on some other consideration. So here, there's doubt. Is this the position of Abu Hanifa? This is a derivation. Right? This is takhrij. Anyways, if you look in Imam Haskafi's commentary, which some of you are not using the two commentary versions, so you won't be able to. May Allah forgive you. So a number of the scholars took the position of the Sahibain, that there'd be liability for it. Why? Because in an invalid sale, even though the sale was invalid, the form of a sale took, there's a form of a sale at some level. If you think of the apple pie example, right? Some element was missing, but there's a form of a sale. That's why we call it bay' batil, a sale that is invalid. So they say this would be similar to the issue of a sawm, what's called يعني القبض على سوم الشراء, when you take possession of something because of the consideration of sale. And we'd shared the resource about that. Correct, Sidi Abdul Latif? Yeah, I believe I sent it. القبض على سوم الشراء. Right? We have a resource related to it a couple of lessons ago. If you take possession of something during negotiation with the price being mentioned, with the intent of purchasing it, if it perishes in your hand, so you took it with the intent of purchasing, so it was during negotiation, with the intent of purchasing, and the price was mentioned, it is madmoon. There is liability in it. So they said this is no less than that. But the first opinion is the summary of long discussion. You can see it is no, because in the consideration of purchasing, when you take possession of something, in the consideration of purchasing, with the price being mentioned, this is a recognized Shari'i act, correct? Yep. So it's a recognized Shari'i act, so there's liability related to it. But in a bay' batil, did a sale take place in the to begin with? No. The apple pie pickup by Uncle Abdul Razak. The purchasing of jewelry from the kid. The, buying a kidney from Uncle Masir. And there's not Masir who's over here, but Uncle Masir, who doesn't know the Sharia. He sold his kidney. No transaction took place that's recognized in the Sharia. So, and this is the position taken by the Majalla, right? And you can see item 370 of the Majalla. Item 370 of the Majalla, they took the position of Imam Abu Hanifa that it is an amana and there's no liability in it unless there is negligence or transgression, right? Okay. So according to this position, it is not like al-qabdu ala sawm al-shira, taking possession for with the consideration of purchase, because that there it's a legitimate consideration. Two fit parties are negotiating and say, okay, I'm interested in buying. Let me check it out. He said, well, it's this much. Says, okay. So in inspection, if it breaks, there's liability. And for delicate items, this is useful for shopkeepers, right? And stores as well. They keep something behind the counter. If someone's interested in inspecting it, of precious jewelry, and you see this in some Muslim country, I've seen it. If you want to see some fine piece, said, okay, are you interested in buying? Yes. Said it's this much. Then, if auntie's trying it on her neck and the jewelry breaks, what would happen? This is al-qabdu ala sawmil shira. You're taking possession of something with the intent of purchasing. What is due in it? If there's damage or it perishes, the qima, right? The market value, the qima. But here, so the fatwa position is there's no liability here, but it is an amana. And this is a sinful sale. It's like entering into a ribawi transaction. So we have to get out of it immediately. One should not remain in a situation of sin. Okay. And then, what's the ruling of a corrupt sale? More sales are corrupt. It says, وَلَوْ قَبَضَ الْمَبِيعَ بَيْعًا فَاسِدًا بِإِذْنِ بَائِعِهِ صَرِيحًا أَوْ دِلَالَةً كَقَبْضِهِ في مجلس عقده وكل من عوضيه مال ملكه. So if the buyer takes possession of the item of sale in a corrupt transaction, right? What are the three causes of corruption again, Sadati?
Jahala, it not being mal.
No. Three. So jahala, gross non-definition of the item of sale, or not mentioning the price, insufficient definition of the price. Either non-definition of the price or insufficient definition. Or number three, corrupting conditions. Right? So if one takes possession of the item of sale in a corrupt transaction with the seller's permission, إذن بائعه. And the permission can be explicit or by indication. What's an example of by indication? So the kaf here is كقبضه. This is the إذن دلالة, by indication such as taking possession of it in the majlis of the contract, i.e. in the presence of the seller. وكل من عوضيه مال, right? And both items of items of exchange are mal. They are of material value, right? He owns it, right? So the buyer owns it, right? But what is clearly understood, which the commentators make clear here, malakahu, but this is milkan khabithan, right? It is khabith, it is vile. So we know what needs to be done, and we'll be seeing further details on that, right? So if the buyer takes possession of it with the permission of the seller, he owns the item, explicit permission or by indication. وَلَزِمَهُ لِهَلَاكِهِ مثله حقيقة أو معنى كالقيمة في القيم. And therefore, if it perishes, what is due, the like of it, actually, if it is مثلي, right? And مثلي is something. So, for example, you took possession of 10 uniball pens of a particular type. Price wasn't set. Before the price was set, it perished. So you can just return 10 uniball pens of the same type. That's the mithl, right? You return the equivalent of it. Or in value, which is the qima, which is the market value, and it's considered on the day of taking possession, right? And when do we consider the mithl or the qima? Is on the day of taking possession, because value can fluctuate. So it's not on the day of the sale, but the day of taking possession, because that's when ownership transfers. Okay. And he says, وَلِكُلٍّ مِّنْهُمَا فَسْخُهُ قَبْلَ الْقَبْضِ وَبَعْدَهُ ما دام في ملك المشتري. It is the right of both parties to cancel the contract. Right? And here, it's tricky to express this, right? So, لِكُلٍّ, what does لِكُلٍّ indicate? That both of them, the lam is for haqq, right? They have the right to do it. But is it only that both parties have the right to cancel? No. That's why Ibrahim al-Haskafi, Imam Ala-ad-Din al-Haskafi, he says, بل عليه. Both of them have the duty. لكل منهما فسخه وعليه ذلك. Right? They both have the right to cancel the transaction, and both of them have the duty to. Right? وعليه. Right? So they have the right to cancel it. So mutual agreement is not required for cancellation. Both have the right to cancel. لكل منهما فسخه وعليه ذلك. Right? And both have the duty, the moral duty to do so. قبل القبض, before taking possession. وبعده, and after taking possession. Because the milk in this situation is a milk خبيث. ما دام في ملك المشتري, as long as it remains in the ownership of the buyer. إذا كان الفساد في صلب العقد, if the corruption is in the contract itself. Right? Such as what? كبيع درهم بدرهمين, such as selling 1 dirham for 2. Right? This is an example of the fasad that is in the contract itself. Right? You have to cancel it. Because وإن كان لشرط زائد كشرط أن يهدي له هدية فكذا قبل القبض. Right? And if the corruption is due to an extra condition, such as the condition that that he gift him a gift, that I sell you this phone for $300 on condition that you gift me your sibha. the same ruling applies. That both have the responsibility to cancel the contract before the qabd. وأما بعده فالفسخ لمن له الشرط لا لمن عليه. But after taking a possession, then the right of cancellation belongs to the one who has the, the condition, the one who says, well, give me the gift, and not the one whom it's due upon. But they both have the duty to, the smart thing would be to rectify the contract in this kind of scenario as well. Okay. So who can annul? You can divide it in this way. Before taking possession, either party can annul. After taking possession, if the corruption is within the contract itself, then either can annul. If the corruption is due to a condition, then the benefiting party can annul after taking possession. Okay, what happens after annulment? وَلَا يَأْخُذُهُ الْبَائِعْ حَتَّى يَرُدَّ ثَمَنَهُ. But after annulment, the seller cannot take it until he returns the price paid. Because otherwise he's being harmed. فَإِن مَاتَ الْبَائِعْ. But if the seller dies, فَالْمُشْتَرِي أَحَقُّ بِهِ حَتَّى يَأْخُذَ ثَمَنَهُ. Then the seller has more right to the item until he gets the payment for it, i.e., back from the family of the seller. Scenario: Uncle Razak went to the baker and he purchased the old payment system. What the cash, the vending machine. So the cash register. There's this old cash register. They're no longer using it, but they had a very fancy cash register. So he purchased the cash register. Only problem was he didn't agree on the price. Uncle Latif carried it, Uncle Abdul Razak carried it home, and because it was much heavier than he anticipated, he had a heart attack and died. Had to be cancelled, right? So this kind of scenario, you know, if payment was made or not made, the seller, so mushtari, the buyer. Okay, this is a bad example. Sorry, dramatic, but the buyer does not have to give the item back until he gets the price that he paid for it back. The example would be something with wrong conditions. Okay. وطاب للبائع ربح ثمنه بعد التقابض. The buyer can keep any profit made from the thaman, from the price of a corrupt sale after possession was taken. So scenario: Latif Bakeries sold 1,000 pies in a corrupt contract. They got the $10,000 for those pies and they made money on that. So there's two things. That there's a hurma in the transaction, but the money itself, is it haram? There's two aspects, right? There's a hurma. What does the hurma relate to? To the dhimma of the person. However, that $10,000, if he now goes and buys other things with it, is the hurma related to the $10,000 itself? No. Right? Right? So, because otherwise, it would it would pollute everything. So the profit made from the price um, um, but this لا للمشتري أي لا يطيب للمشتري, but the buyer, the mushtari, he cannot keep the profit of what he sells. فيتصدق به. So what's the scenario? Those pies, $10,000 worth of pies. So the payment itself, because there's no hurma in the money, so money made on that money would not be haram. But those pies, they were acquired through a corrupt contract. So when the buyer, the mushtari, goes and resells the pies, the profit, unless you've rectified the contract, right? Unless you've rectified the contract, you went and you sold those pies on that profit. So they went to a bakery and they bought $10,000 worth of pies, and then they're selling it to small shops. But that original contract is fasid. So the seller now, right? Money, the hurma relates to the dhimma. But when it comes to, they had to correct that transaction, but they didn't. But the corrupt sale, what's the subject of the sale? What's the subject of the sale? Yeah, the item of sale. Here, the $10,000 worth of pies. So in this case, he owns these pies milkan khabithan. So what happens? If he goes and sells these pies for $15,000, the profit made is not tayyib. He has to give it in charity. It's like earning from riba. Right? So he has to give it as sadaqah. And this is wajib shar'an. So this is why the famous statement of Sayyidina Umar that's mentioned in the Muwatta, لا يدخل سوقنا من لم يتفقه في ديننا. That no one enter our marketplace as long as they have not gained knowledge of our deen. And here by deen meaning the religious rulings related to transactions. فإنه يقع في الربا شاء أم أبى. For otherwise they'll fall into riba whether they want to or not. كما طاب ربح مال ادعاه فقضي ثم تصادقا على عدمه فرد به ما ربح فيه المدعي. And this is similar to the profit of money that someone claimed, and qada was made that yes, it is rightfully yours. But then afterwards, the two parties, so qada annuls what comes before, right? So then the two parties agreed that, you know what, that transaction never took place. So it was returned back after he made money on it. And the secret to this is that, let's say two parties had a transaction and they said, oh, that money is mine. So the qadi made judgment that yes, it's yours. So it was given back to him. In the meantime, they said, oh, you know what? We did do that sale. During this period, the one who got the money had traded in it, so he'd made profit on it, 10%, 15%. That remains. And the basis being that the qada al-qadi is a recognized annulment of the previous transaction. Okay. فإن باع المشتري ما شراه شراء فاسدا صح. If the buyer sells what he purchased through a corrupt transaction, the sale is valid. The sale itself is valid. Right? The sale is valid. وكذا لو أعتقه أو وهبه أو وسلمه. Likewise, if they free him or gift him and deliver it. And in this case, وسقط حق الفسخ. And in this case, the right of annulment is ended. So those pies were sold on. So there's a separate issue. Is the profit from that valid or not? Permissible or not? That's one thing. But once the original buyer in the corrupt transaction sold it, and sometimes it can be subtle. Such as what? Can you go to a baker and say, bake me 1,000 pies for $10,000? What's the problem with that transaction? Bake me 1,000 pies. And the bakery sells meat pies, apple pies, cherry pies, and mulukhiyya pies. Yeah, so there is gross non-definition. Now, there are ways to validate that, but if let's say that that transaction took place, they were sinful at that point. It could be validated later. So when it's being delivered, you say, okay, are you fine with those pies? The guy checks. If they ask us sometimes, what kind of pies are these? Right, at some point, and there's an agreement, it would be corrected at that point when the non-definition was lifted. But if it was never lifted, he took possession of it, he never inspected it, and he sold it on, for example. Right? So this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, O traders, impurity overcomes your transactions. So moisten it, so freshen it, moisten it, you clean it up, or you make it wholesome through charity. But the ulama say you cannot just transact carelessly and then say, I'll just give in charity. Because the charity does not lift the sin. Right? So, but if you went and sold it, the right of annulling the previous contract ends. وَسَقَطَ حَقُّ الْفَسْخ. And the right of annulling the original transaction, buying $10,000 worth of pies with non-definition of what exactly are you buying. وَعَلِيهِ قِيمَتُهُ. But what is due here legally? The market value is due, not the price that they agreed upon. So if this happened and payment was not made, now if they agreed to the price, no, you can keep the mark. Let's say the market value of those pies sold wholesale was $8,000. But they'd agreed to $10,000. If they differ, only the market value would be due. In a corrupt transaction, what is legally due? The market value of that kind of transaction. It differs whether it's sold, retail or wholesale, volume, all these things. That's assuming they don't agree to something else. ولو بنى في دار اشتراها فاسدا أو غرس فعليه قيمتها. If one built on a property, so dar is a property, something you build walls around. So the old days, like a Beit Arabi, you bought like the shell, and now you built the rooms inside, for example. Or in our times, you bought a plot of land. That also be, you bought a residential property. So dar, you could translate as residential property. So what did you do? You bought a residential property in a corrupt transaction. But then you built upon it. بنى في دار اشتراه. You built on it. You built a house on it. Or you planted trees. So now you can no longer return it because you purchased land. So if you cancel the transaction, what do we do with the with the house or the trees? فعليه قيمتها. He has to pay the market value of that item. وقال this is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. وقال, and the Sahibain said, ينقض البناء والغرس ويرد. Right? ينقض البناء, and the Sahibain said that the building must be demolished and the trees uprooted and returned. And so the first is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. The second is the position of the Sahibain. And here a very interesting thing happened. وشك أبو يوسف في روايته لمحمد عن الإمام. And Abu Yusuf doubted regarding what he narrated to Muhammad from Imam Abu Hanifa, which is the first position. لزوم قيمتها. ولم يشك Muhammad, but Imam Muhammad did not doubt. So what's the scenario? Who's the primary transmitter of the positions of our three Imams? Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. A lot of what Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani narrates from Imam Abu Hanifa is through Abu Yusuf. Because how long did Imam Muhammad al-Hasan study directly with Imam Abu Hanifa?
3 years.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years. So it's not just a question of time, right? It's what you do with the time. And what Allah blesses in your time. Okay. They say ليست العبرة لمن سبق إنما العبرة لمن صدق. Right? It's not just a question of who came first or how long, but how blessed as well. Anyways, so Imam Muhammad al-Hasan narrates this in the way described. Right? That if one builds on a proper residential property that one purchased in a corrupt transaction or planted trees on that property, then the qima is due. This is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. Abu Yusuf and Muhammad agreed on their position that no, you have to remove the building, uproot the trees and return the property as it was. But then Abu Yusuf said, I don't remember. But this is the caution in narration. Abu Yusuf did not deny the narration. What did he say? I don't remember narrating this. So shakka fi riwayatihi. I don't remember telling you that Abu Hanifa said this. But Imam Muhammad said, I remember that you narrated this. And there's a few issues like this. Whose opinion is taken on the position of Imam Abu Hanifa? Whose opinion would be taken on what does represent the position of Imam Abu Hanifa? Imam Muhammad's. Why? Because, it's a matter of the science of narration, but they say that al-muthbit muqaddam ala al-nafi. Someone who affirms and they're sure, right? two reliable narrators. One affirms that this is what took place. The other says, I don't remember that. So the one who affirms is given precedence because they're sure and they're a trustworthy narrator, and the standard of transmission is high. The standard of transmission is high. Abu Yusuf is not denying. He's not saying that, no, Abu Hanifa's position is something else. Then you'd have to weigh between the two. Rather, Abu Yusuf said, I don't remember. So here, the one who affirms it is given precedence. There's a series of issues like this. They say one of the excuses is that Imam Muhammad al-Hasan, firstly, we have to be clear. Who's higher in rank in the madhab? Abu Yusuf or Muhammad al-Hasan? Yeah, Abu Yusuf, right? He's more senior. But Muhammad al-Hasan spent most of his time transmitting the madhab, teaching and transmitting the madhab. Abu Yusuf also taught, but he got busy with what? Qada. He was the judge. He was a Qadi al-Qudat, the chief justice under Harun al-Rashid. So they said that this would be based on that there are some issues that he no longer remembered due to that. Even though he's at a high level of narration and trustworthiness, etc. Okay. So this is the issue of building a house sold. And here, this is a strong difference of opinion. And here, there's ikhtilaf in tasheeh. Right? What would the author's norm indicate that is the chosen opinion? Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. Even though, right, some of the scholars, amongst them Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, took the position of the Sahibain. And this is assuming that there's no agreement. So what's the scenario? Corrupt sale of a plot of land. So Zubair has to pay for the mahar for Zubaydah. So he has a plot of land in Karachi. So he goes to Uncle Masir. Uncle Masir, I'll sell you a plot of land in Defense Housing Society, Phase 5, for $500,000. Uncle Masir, not Sidi Masir, accepts. What's the problem? Is a plot of land sufficiently defined? No. But then Uncle Masir goes and he builds. And do you have to see a place to build on it? Oh, yeah. Uncle Masir is wealthy. He sends his nephew to start building a house on it. And they realize, oh my God, we didn't agree on the terms. The seller, Zubayr, repents. And he repented because Zubaydah rejected his mahar because she said that's a corrupt sale. I don't want to marry you anymore. So he wants the plot of land back. What happens to that property? Right? So Abu Hanifa is pragmatic, right? That if someone has already built upon it, etc., you remove harm, but you remove it with the least, right? So this is like a ziyada muttasila, an increase that is connected to the item sale. Is it normally an easy thing to demolish a home? No. Right? Someone is going to use it as an orchard. So harm is lifted, but harm is lifted the the lesser harm. So they mention, like in the examples of harm is lifted, um, what if, like if Zubayr is getting married to Zubaydah and he bought her a gold ring. Anything wrong with a woman wearing a gold ring? No. Contrary to certain literalists, by ijma, women are permitted to wear gold. So he's looking at the ring as he's walking down the hill in Amman, and he drops the ring, and a chicken eats the ring. The wedding is in, the nikah ceremony is in 2 days. Chicken has, the ring is in that particular chicken. There's only one chicken there. What do we do? It's okay, let's wait for the, the ring to come out. But let's say it's going to take time for it to die. This happening after Dhuhr. The nikah is after Asr. What do we do?
Would that be similar to a context when, for example, the husband, the prospective husband gave the ring to a lady, and while swimming in the sea or river, the lady is no more possession of the ring. It is lost.
No, it's not lost. No, because we know, no. Because the ring has fallen in the river, it's lost. But so the chicken belongs to Uncle Latif. The ring belongs to Zubair. He wanted to give it to Zubaydah. The nikah is after Asr. What's worth more, the ring or the chicken? No, there's a binary question. Is the ring worth more or the chicken? Yeah, right? And we consider value materially. Like emotional attachment of Uncle Latif to his chicken does not have material value. It's not considered in matters like this. Now, if they can come to some agreement, whatever, that's a different thing. Rather, so if there's no time, right, they can't differ. Zubaydah, it's hard enough that they agreed to the nikah. If you know the story of Zubayr and Zubaydah, it's taken years. And still, it's on the edge, right? So here, if there's no other way, then the chicken would be slaughtered, and what would be due? The current market value of that chicken, not the emotional value to Uncle Latif, etc. Sorry, Uncle Latif, for the slaughter of your chicken. But if we went to the Qadi would say, or the Mufti would say, slaughter the chicken, pay for the equivalent price of the chicken. If you want to do some good, pay extra, say sorry, maybe give some baklawa as a gesture of thanks. But that's what's due. And then no more talking about this. Demanding more than the market value of the chicken would be considered to be stuht, consuming unlawful wealth, because you cannot demand that which is not rightfully yours. Okay, that's just a side issue. So in this situation, Abu Hanifa's position is that you have to pay for the material value of, that if you build on the property, then you compensate for the market value of the land and you can keep the property. So that nobody has, so the seller got the material value of their land, but that buyer is not harmed for what he did. Right? So the harm is lifted, but harm is lifted by the least harm that can be inflicted. Okay. The final part, we have some disliked sales. Disliked sales, al-buyur al-makruha, are sales that in of themselves are valid. They're valid and they're sound. They're valid because the offer and acceptance took place from two fit parties on a recognized item of sale. صدور ركنه من أهله على محله. That ensures that the sale is valid, right? What's called munaqid. And there's no corrupting element. What are the three key corrupting elements, Sadati? أسباب الفساد? Yeah, so the item was insufficiently defined, is corrupting, or the price being insufficiently defined. Right? Insufficiently defined, such as if it's unknown, right? Or other aspects, deferred but to an uncertain date, etc. There could be various elements of non-definition about the price. And the third is, anyone else? Third one? Yeah, no, not corrupting elements, corrupting conditions. Corrupting conditions. Jazakallah khairan, Ibrahim. Okay, corrupting conditions. So, the disliked sales, it's munaqid, it's the sale is valid, it took place, and it's sound. There's no corrupting element in it. However, there's a meaning associated with the transaction that incorporates karaha, dislikeness, into the sale. It could be karaha tahrim, if the harm, the external condition is grave, or it could be tanzih, slight, if the disliked element is slight. And this is very important because there's a few aspects that are mansus, that are textually established. And we'll take them. But this has many elements related to disliked transactions in our times. And we'll look at that. So we've taken time, but stay with us, folks. Okay. Disliked sales. So he says, kuriha najash. Right? Najash is a false inflated bid. What's a false inflated bid? Uncle Latif's a very pious guy, but he's not a good seller. Right? So he sells apple pie. He sells these very good hand knit shawls, but he doesn't get. But he feels he could make more money. So the shaitan comes and whispers that you should hire Zubair. Zubair is looking for easy money because he got married and he doesn't have a job. So Zubair hangs around Uncle Latif, and what does he do? He just makes false bids. So Uncle Latif was selling the shawls for $100 to people. So he comes and bids, so they raise the price. So he gets a higher price. So instead of selling them at $100, he's selling the shawls for $140, $150. That's najash. So this is false bidding. And people do this in the market just to drive up the price. The only reason it would be allowed would be if someone is not able to get the qima, the market value of the item. Right? So that would be, but even then, it's not a wholesome way of transacting. وَالصَّوْمُ عَلَى صَوْمِ غَيْرِهِ إِذَا رَضِيَا بِثَمَنٍ. Or bidding on another's bid if the two parties had agreed to the price. And the basis of this, so the Prophet ﷺ forbade najash. He said, وَلَا تَنَاجَشُوا. Right? And the hadith, Sidi Abdul Latif, we can share it from the Arba'in al-Nawawiyah. Right? There's a whole number of prophetic principles in the hadith. And we can share the commentary of Mullah Ali al-Qari from his sharh on the hadith. I'll share the PDF of Mullah Ali al-Qari's commentary. We'll just share the commentary on that hadith. So the najash is forbid. What and and the Prophet ﷺ forbade bidding on your brother's bid. But bidding on another's bid is only impermissible once they have agreed to the terms. Right? But the sale did not yet take place. So they're negotiating, right? So Uncle Masir came and he agreed, okay, Shaykh Faraz, I'll buy those weights from you for $50. I said, inshallah, but bring the money and then we'll make the sale. I know Uncle Masir, he agrees to all kinds of things, he forgets. So we agreed to the terms. This is called musawama, negotiating. So you agreed on the terms, we say, okay, we'll make the transaction tomorrow. Right? This is the sample, I'll bring the actual new unit from the warehouse, he'll bring the money, and we'll make the contract then. So there's a negotiation phase and the contract phase. Well, if we'd agreed on terms, then someone comes and outbids, that's when it is makruh tahriman, because it harms relations. Outbidding one another is permitted in the Sharia. The Prophet ﷺ engaged in bidding, and that's permissible. The same thing applies to khitbah as a separate thing. Are you allowed to propose on another person's proposal? Of course, being sensitive is a different thing, but it is prohibited, makruh tahriman, to propose on another's proposal if the two parties have agreed to the marriage, but the marriage hasn't taken place. So like in modern terms, if engagement takes place, right? So an engagement is an agreement to marry. Is an engagement a marriage? No, right? If the two parties agree to marry, so you propose and you've agreed to marry, then for someone else to propose would be sinful. And the ethic and the moral thing for someone to do, whether the male or the female, whichever one's proposed to, they say, excuse me, I'm already engaged. I do not want to consider this. And they should first end the proposal, end the engagement, and then consider the other proposal, right? But before that, like I know a situation where, you know, I was stuck in the middle between all three parties. This man and this woman, they were discussing about marriage for 2.5 years, but they'd not agreed to marry. And there are discussions taking place, but no engagement had taken place. And a third party came and they said, I want to marry so and so. I said, look, I can't be involved. But I know that she's considering someone else. He said, are they engaged? So I said, not that I'm aware of. And he reached out and he got married within a few days. Is that sinful? That's sinful, Sadati?
Sorry, is it the first person or the second person?
The second person.
If it is with the second person, normally the lady or the relative of the lady should have her permission to get released from that.
No. No, there's no engagement took place. Two parties are discussing marriage. A third party comes and makes a proposal. Is it sinful?
At least the lady should inform first speaker.
No. That's not the question. Islamically, the ruling is very clear, right? That making a proposal on another's proposal is only sinful if the first proposal has been accepted. So if engagement has taken place, right? So a proposal for marriage has been accepted, but nikah hasn't taken place. So once two parties are engaged, then making a proposal is sinful. Before that, it's not. Now it could be indiscreet, unwise. Like there's many things. It may be indiscreet, but it's not sinful. It's not sinful, right? So one has to be discreet about it. It requires mudara and hikmah. It requires discretion and wisdom. How do you proceed? It requires um, uh, these unnecessary comments. If we could delete them from Facebook, please, Sidi Abdul Latif. So the basic principle is you cannot bid on another's bid if they've agreed to terms. You cannot bid on another's bid when? If they have agreed to terms. And likewise, you cannot propose for nikah on another's proposal if they have agreed to the proposal, i.e. engagement took place. وتلقي الجلب المضر بأهل البلد. تلقي الجلب is preemptively agreeing with the sellers that are coming into town. So villagers used to come to town with their produce, crops, animals, or whatever, or traders used to come during trade season. So what would people do? Merchants would go outside the city limits, meet them on the highway, and the jalab is al-majlub, that which is brought into town. So talaqqi al-jalab, so meeting the sellers who are coming to town and so buying from them is disliked if it harms the people of the town. Right? So why? Because lots of sellers would be coming from, let's say, with crops from the villages. So one trader, what would he do? Or a group of traders say, look, let's go to the highway. They're coming with the harvest. We'll buy the whole thing from them. Because they said, you guys, you don't want to come into the city. It's going to cost you for accommodation and days to sell. We'll buy the whole thing from you. But then now, if one or two people own all the fruits and vegetables that are coming into the city, are they just going to sell it at a good rate in the city? What are they going to do with it? Right? They're going to inflate the price, right? So if this harms the people of the town, how? By it increasing the price above the market, above the reasonable market price, then the authorities would have a duty to prevent that which inflates the price for Ahl al-Balad, for the people of the town. Akin to this would be the creating of what's it called? Monopolies are the radical case. What's it called? Oligarchies, right? Oligarchies where you only have a few service providers. Because what do those service providers tend to do? They tend to agree between themselves to act like monopolists. So in many markets, how many cell phone companies are there? Just a handful. But in many places, what do they do? They divvy up the markets so that each one is acting essentially like a monopolist. Were they real competition, what would happen? The price would go down for the general market. So part of the duty of, and this is min ahkam al-hisba, from the public duties of um, social accountability. It's called, there's a whole science in fiqh called al-hisba or al-ihtisab. And there's books in the Hanafi school on nisab al-ihtisab, for example. And there's duties related to the marketplace. And one of the important thing is for the marketplace to be open and that there be competition. Right? So to break not only monopolies, but also oligarchies, or these, where you have a small group of sellers, especially if they hoard the supply of the good or the service in a way that inflates the market value. So it's mentioned, for example, in the Fatawa al-Mahdiyya, that you cannot, that the sellers of a particular craft cannot prevent other people who are objectively qualified from entering the marketplace. So in many countries, professional associations, what do? They do not give, like if people come from overseas, right? So in Canada, for example, both doctors and nurses, we don't have enough doctors in Canada, we don't have enough nurses. Even though we have thousands of doctors and thousands of nurses from overseas, but their qualifications are not validated. Why? Who doesn't want there to be more doctors in Canada? The most obvious group that doesn't want more doctors in Canada.
Medical consultants, and it is an issue of keeping that standard in as much as you can't allow any company can hurry with the profit.
No, 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 no. We're saying no, no, no. Say the who does not want qualified doctors to practice in a jurisdiction?
The medical profession is regulated by the council. It is only the council who is entitled to access.
Okay, no, no, but no, no. So I accept that. Let's say the doctor is qualified. Who would not want the doctor to practice in the marketplace? To practice other doctors, right? Because if you have 1,000 doctors providing services to 1,000,000 people, right, they can charge much more than if there are 2,000 doctors serving 1,000,000 people, right? If supply increases with the same amount of demand, what happens to the price of the service? It goes down, right? So, but Islamically, that is not permissible. It's similar to, right, where you hoard, you take control of the supply or limit the supply in order to inflate the price. This applies to goods and it applies to services as well. Right? So, for example, if there's only one supplier for a particular type of produce that people need, it would be the duty, especially of the things that are necessities and needs of people. It'd be the ruling that you cannot limit the supply, and if they cannot solve it by other than that, we'd have to ensure that other suppliers be incorporated into the marketplace. The same thing applies with professional guilds, whether it be all professions. The people of those professions try to limit access to the market, and that is not allowed. That's not allowed. And they put false conditions. There's things, yes, you don't want any, like the brother, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, mentioned, you don't want just any old person working, whether it's as a carpenter or a plumber or a doctor or an engineer. But if someone is qualified, you cannot limit them on the basis. Why? Because ultimately people want to limit the supply of other service providers so that they can inflate the prices. No, but that's a completely separate issue, Sayyidi. That's a separate issue. We're not talking about that, right? But for a Muslim, Like, so if we would have a moral duty to change, if a law is unjust, we are stuck by that law, but we have a moral duty to change it. Right? Moral duty to change it by due process, right? And in a Muslim society, we would have a duty. So if, let's say, someone is a medical doctor, you cannot be party to limiting access to other doctors joining in. You'd have to take a moral stance that this is not permissible, right? That yes, we have a duty as professionals to ensure that people who are practicing in sensitive professions, they're qualified, but we cannot limit access for our self-interest. Yeah, the public interest is given precedence over the private interest in these situations. Okay, I don't want to digress from the topic too much, but this is an important principle that has practical implications. وبيع الحاضر للبادي طمعا في غلاء الثمن زمن القحط. And for the people of the land to sell to outsiders seeking to increase the price in times of famine. So in a city, you have, for example, you have limited access to to primary crops, to primary like staple foods and other essentials. The necessity, and the ulama define it in our times as being the necessities and needs of people. That would encompass many things. So you cannot export, for example, the necessities and needs of a society, particularly when, if you do so, they would be qaht, they would be famine, or and akin to famine would be undue hardship for the people of that land. This would include, in our times, for example, let's say, this happened in parts of South America where they were growing quinoa, and that was the staple of those, of those regions. But there's this whole fad for a while, if you guys remembered, everyone and their uncle was eating quinoa. But it made that staple food unaffordable for the people of that land. This would be the same thing. It would be makruh. If we were living in that land, we'd have to say that first you have to secure access to the necessities and needs, like the staple foods and core needs of the people in your land before you export. Right? To the extent that at least the basic needs are fulfilled, then you export. So that's بيع الحاضر للبادي. It would encompass that which harms the local population. Okay. Then there's one other issue, right? وبيع والبيع عند أذان الجمعة, and selling after the Friday adhan. Selling after the Friday adhan. لا بيع من يزيد, and not selling, not sales through outbidding another. This is when the two parties were still negotiating. They hadn't agreed on terms. Okay, selling after the Friday adhan. This is a sensitive issue because we know from Surah Al-Jumu'ah, right? إذا يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. So there's a condition and two consequences, right? إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة, when the call is given to prayer on Friday. And what's meant by the nida للصلاة? Yeah, the adhan that signals the entering of the time. إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا. So this is a conditional statement. If this, then there are two rulings, right? إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله. Rush to the remembrance of Allah. The remembrance of Allah refers to what? To the khutbah. Rush, i.e., head to the khutbah, such that you catch the whole khutbah, missing anything of the khutbah without recognize excuse that as at that level of wajib or above, um, unless it's unavoidable. Someone had to use the toilet, they had to use the toilet, right? But you know, that's a physical need. But فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. So once the adhan is given, rush to the Remembrance Salah. Do not delay getting to the Friday prayer, to the Friday khutbah in its entirety. وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ, and leave transaction. So that is the relied upon position, and the stronger position is once Dhuhr time comes in on Friday, all transaction is impermissible. All transaction is impermissible, even transacting while you're going to Friday prayer. So if you want to, sales and hire, so can you hire someone to drive you to Salatul Jumu'ah? The stronger position is no. If you are walking on time to Jumu'ah, so you're going to make it to the khutbah. إِذَا تَبَايَعَا وَهُمَا يَمْشِيَانِ. The adhan is given. Once the adhan is given, you're going to get there 5 minutes early, but you're walking to Jumu'ah, but the adhan has been given. Can you transact while walking? Not on the stricter opinion, and that's the more cautious opinion. But the more expansive opinion is that the amr has a ghaya. إذا نودي, it's not just that when the adhan is given, right? إذا نودي للصلاة, right? When the call is given for the prayer, right? This for the prayer is significant. Why? فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. So can you finish eating your croissant and your 3 sips of coffee before heading out? Yes. إذا لم يكن مخلا بالصلاة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله. Right? So rush to the Remembrance Salah, as long as you make it in time for the khutbah. Can you finish having your croissant and your halwa puri and then go to Salatul Jumu'ah? Yes, if you're going to get there on time. وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. And on this opinion, you could finish your transaction, or you could order a taxi or finish the sale, as long as you're going to, as long as you're sure, right? You have غَلَبَةُ ظَنٍّ قَوِي, that you're going to make it to to the khutbah al-Jumu'ah in full. And that's the position actually taken by Imam al-Haskafi, and there's lots of discussion on it. It goes back to the interpretation of the verse and the role of lis-salah in that. There's an if-then statement, and this is particularly the fatwa would be on this position, because is Salatul Jumu'ah held always right at the beginning of the time? Is always held right at the beginning of the time? No, right? So the other opinion would make life difficult. Now, if you want to be cautious, you'd go to the earliest Jumu'ah that's within the time, and you get there before the time, because that is superior, right? There's degrees of reward. There's great merit in getting to Salatul Jumu'ah hours early. Shaykh Faraz Shaheen, who's on the Fatwa Council Jordan, once came, just like long ago, when he was still a student. He was very concerned. He said, I don't know what to do on Friday. I said, go to Salatul Jumu'ah. He said, no, Sayyidi, the best time to go to Salatul Jumu'ah is before sunrise. But it's also sunnah to sit in the masjid till sunrise. And the best time to do the ghusl of Jumu'ah is after sunrise. So how do and he was really concerned. And we came up to the solution, but he was really concerned, right? But that's the people of taqwa. Right? And mashallah, Allah blesses the knowledge of such people, because barakah is not in numbers, barakah is in meaning. Right? And he's someone who I've known for over a quarter century now. Shaykh Faraz Shaheen, as being a alim amil bi'ilmihi, a scholar who acts upon his knowledge. someone worthy of benefiting from. We have some excellent classes. Anyways, so the fatwa would be that sale during the adhan, after the adhan is given, if in akhalla bis-sa'i, right? If it would delay you getting to the khutbah in full. Otherwise, not. And that's what Imam al-Haskafi chose, and that, especially in our times, is the more expansive opinion, more practical opinion, but get to Friday prayer early. And it's not disliked to outbid others. وَصَحَّ الْبَيْعَ فِي الْجَمِيعِ. In all of these cases, the sale is valid. And then there is a last issue, right, related to the rights of bond servants. You can, well, just read it. وَمَنْ مَلَكَ مَمْلُوكَيْنِ صَغِيرَيْن أَوْ كَبِيرًا وَصَغِيرًا أخذهما وأحدهما ذو رحم محرم من الآخر كره تحريما أن يفرق بينهما بدون حق مستحق, and not separating between a child and his relatives. ويصح البيع خلافا لأبي يوسف في قرابة الولاد في رواية وفي الجميع في أخرى. Right, so one should not separate between children and immediate relatives when they're small. فإن كانا كبيرين فلا بأس بالتفريق. But if they're adults, there's nothing wrong with it, but nothing wrong with it that still it'd be better to avoid. So that's the section. We saw a number of things. We took our time to try to understand clearly when a condition corrupts a sale and when it's invalid, differentiating between consequences of invalid and corrupt sales, learning about cases where sales are disliked, and بإذن ta'ala, next we're going to look at the issues of cancellation, iqala, and trust sales. And here, I would advise, if you want to prepare well for this, understand what are the principles according to Abu Hanifa, what are the principles according to Abu Yusuf, what are the principles according to Abu Yusuf. If you're clear on the principles of cancellation on all three, the issue would be very clear, inshallah. We'll go through it relatively quickly otherwise. And we also cover Babul Muraja'a wa Tawliya, what they're called Buyu'ul Amana, and we'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Okay, there's a very good question. That would it be good to understand? It would be good to understand the details regarding the thaman being more than the market value. You can agree on anything as long as there's no lying, cheating, or deception. You can sell more than the market value. Nasiha would entail that if someone offers you more ما لا يتغابن به, like, sometimes people give higher prices, lower prices. Someone wealthy comes, they're not looking for a discount, right? So someone wants to buy your Afghani carpet, they look really wealthy, so I'll sell it for this much, right? You can. Nasiha would entail that you keep it within market value, and they call it ما يتغابن بمثله. In the market, people give this kind of fluctuation. You buy the same shawl from a discount store and a premium store, different prices are given. That's fine. But giving a price that's against nasiha. What is sinful is to deceive the person to believe that this is a good price or it is the market price. Otherwise, the two parties can agree on whatever price. If you look at how wealthy the Sahaba became within a few years of getting to Medina, they did not sail by sales. Trade is about making money. You make it ethically, but can you make extraordinary profits? Yes, as long as there's no lying, cheating, or deception involved in that. Right? So it is sinful where there's deception involved. And there's consequences to that. Where you are selling above the market value. So even in expensive stores, they don't sell it at that price. That would, because like I was just looking at winter jackets. I ended up getting too many. I have 3 winter jackets. I need to get rid of one, but I was just looking at a winter jacket because I'd considered buying some earlier. So I bought a winter jacket for a certain price. Let's say $200. But there's winter jackets that I'm being shown, because I turned off my ad blockers, for $895. I'm never going to buy that. But, prices fluctuate. Is it clearly better than what I got? No. But there's market variances. You can sell anything you want for any price, as long as there isn't any deception involved. When there's deception, it is sinful, and there are both moral consequences and legal consequences. Selling for more than the market value without deception is contrary to nasiha, because you should look at the other party's interest as well. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.